William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I welcome you to another Two Hats special of community events. Let's look in and see what's really happening.
All right. Good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started with the second meeting of the Dallas Area Partnership to End and Prevent Homelessness. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you for taking the time on your Friday to get here. Just a couple introductions, or a couple, really just kind of open. We had our first meeting where we really got something that's new and different, for the city and for the county and our region, as we're trying to do better than we ever have to address a homeless population. I think to echo the gravity of what we're facing, we're doing good, but we're not doing good enough, as evidenced by the fact that we lost two of our most vulnerable citizens this week to the cold. And I would not like us to ever forget the purpose of our work, that really what we're here is for them and not for us. So with that,
Go on with silence.
I think that's a wonderful idea, if you guys don't mind. Thank you very much. Okay, with that being said, we have an action-packed day, so but we do have a little bit of housekeeping. So with that, I'll turn it over to my co-chair, Commissioner Daniels.
Well, let's begin. First of all, welcome. Happy New Year. It seems like it's only the 19th, but it's almost seems like an old year. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes of the first meeting?
We're going to have a...
Yes, any changes to be made?
I haven't seen any.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. One of the things that at the first meeting we did quite a bit of talking about wanting to create a strong foundation for this particular organization. And in our first discussions, it became apparent that we had a little bit more reading to do in order for all of us to get into our own heads. What are the documents that we have brought together to create that foundation? And one of our assignments was to reread, in case you, or read if you hadn't had the chance, the bylaws of this body in order to, first of all, we have to approve them. So has everyone had a chance to read the bylaws as they have been put together by our legal departments? Were there any items in there that we ought to, I think it looked like a fairly basic document that if we do see fit in the future to change, we would be able to. But at this moment, Dr. Cerise.
No, I didn't see him. I missed the last meeting, so I haven't seen him. So.
Well, you failed the pop quiz then, so.
Yeah, well, you should have received them. Hearing that there are no other kinds of observations of problems with it, is there a motion to approve the bylaws as they've been presented to us? Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Now we can move to the third point, which would then be included in those bylaws, are that in addition to, initially we're having a set of co-chairs for this organization. There is a requirement, there is a must rather than a shall, that there be a treasurer and that there be a secretary for this group. So if there is somebody in this group who'd be willing to take on the role of secretary, if you have the chance, the board shall appoint the secretary of the corporation to keep the minutes of the meetings of the board in one or more books provided for that purpose. See that all notices are duly given in accordance with the provisions of the bylaws or as required by law. By custodian of the corporation records and in general perform all duties incident in the office of secretary and such other duties as from time to time may be assigned by the board or the chair. Secretary of the corporation shall serve at the discretion of the board and shall be removed as secretary by the board at any time with or without cause. A wonderful volunteer, please.
I'll volunteer with the help of Walter, to keep up with things. He's my staff, so make sure he has one on his plate, so.
Wonderful. Thank you for stepping up, Carol. We appreciate that. Is there a motion to accept Carol as the secretary of this board?
So moved.
I accept it.
All right.
All those in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Thank you, and congratulations to Carol Lucky,
Very welcome.
first secretary of this august body. Moving on to treasurer. The board shall appoint the treasurer of the corporation, who shall have charge and custody and be responsible for all funds and securities of the corporation, receive and give receipts of monies due and payable to the corporation from any source whatsoever. Deposit all such monies in the name of the corporation, such banks as shall be selected in accordance with the provisions of these bylaws, and in general perform all duties incident to the office of treasurer and such other duties as from time to time may be assigned by the chair or by the board. The treasurer of the corporation shall serve at the discretion of the board and shall be removed as treasurer of the board at any time with or without cause. Is there another able volunteer who would be willing to take on this, obviously along with great support?
Madam Chair, I'm recommending Bernadette, not all,
I was like.
I second it.
with full faith and confidence.
All right. Thank you, Bernadette.
Oh, I thought you would. And I know you did.
Well, I think that's a lovely idea. I second that motion.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
I'll do it.
You'll do it.
I would not be a team player.
you will be a team player.
Yes.
You always are a team player. That's why we're all here together. All those in favor, say aye.
All right.
And anyone opposed, stay home.
All right.
Thank you so much. Congratulations, Bernadette, for agreeing to help us out in these initial steps. There will be, of course, support from a vast array of folks, so that, no, we are not in this by ourselves.
Okay.
But thank you.
Well, wonderful. Well, we've gotten our housekeeping done, so let's bring up Diana Gray. Let's start getting into the,
We did the
I'm sorry?
We did the
Hi, how are y'all?
Hi.
I'm Diana Gray with CSH, and as you know, have been engaged to provide some consulting support to the body. So the first conversation that we want to have today is in response to a request that was made by the members last meeting for just a level setting of what do we know at a very basic level about homelessness in Dallas County. And so actually, yeah, we'll go ahead and go forward. So I think it's important for us to think about this in multiple levels, because there is a lot of data out there and a lot of complexity in the system. So the first level that we're going to discuss today is really descriptive, at the descriptive level. How many folks are homeless? What do we know about the population in terms of their, demographics or special needs? And from there in the future, we'll move on to really asking ourselves not just what is, but how we're doing as a community in addressing homelessness. And so some of the things that we think about there are almost dashboard indicators. So for example, how long are people staying homeless once they become homeless? Because we need to move them very quickly back into housing. That lets us compare ourselves to other communities so that we have an understanding of where we could do better or where we're doing great. Look at our year-on-year trends, and then really sort of begin to identify more clearly what our gaps are in the system. And then finally, at a much more granular level, what I think of sort of data-driven management. So we have systems that are capable of giving us very detailed data at the client level and at the program level, but those are really sort of, once we get down to the management level, we need to tweak something, we need to figure out a specific problem that we have identified. So there's so much of this that I just want to make sure that we understand that this will be a gradual process, in terms of going through the various types of data that are available to the partnership. Today we will be doing the very top level. I'll go to the next slide. So let's talk just about key data sources. Perhaps the most critical are a couple of data sources that are managed by the Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance in their role as the Continuum of Care lead agency. The first is an annual homeless point-in-time count, which I believe you guys have scheduled for next week as well. This is a HUD-mandated count that happens once a year where armies of volunteers go out onto the streets and into the shelters and actually count how many folks are homeless on that one night, so that we have a snapshot, if you will, of what that looks like day to day. I'm empowering you. Thank you. So that gives us some really important basic demographic data. In addition to that, MDHA, again, HUD mandated, manages or coordinates a homeless management information system. And at the core, that is a system whereby participating agencies enter their client encounter data when someone enters a program, when someone leaves. So that gives us a lot of data, not only about the clients, but about how the programs are doing. And there are three other general areas where there is data that's very important to us. Certainly our healthcare partners, the Parkland system in particular is very critical as our safety net. And I know that MDHA and Parkland are working on integrating some of their data now. Very important in terms of knowing what the patterns of utilization are for folks who are homeless, how we can serve them better, and also kind of understanding what the costs are. Our homeless neighbors often interact with the criminal justice system, and so jail data and court data becomes very important. We look at, for example, how many folks are in jail on a particular night. We might know how many jail bed days they are experiencing over time. And then a final area is the public school systems, which are also mandated to identify students who are homeless. And we'll talk a little bit about that going forward, about how that data is a little bit different than the other data sets that we have. So just in terms of gross numbers, how big is the problem? On any given night, or at least on given nights in January, last year we had almost 3,800 people homeless. And that's literally homeless, either in a shelter, on the street, in a car. Transitional housing does count, but generally in places not meant for long-term human habitation. Of those, 71% were in our shelters, and 30% were actually unsheltered. So street, car, abandoned building, etc. We will, of course, have an update of that very soon, we hope. And so a little bit about trending with our point-in-time count. One of the tricky things about point in time is that we are always tweaking, trying to get our methodology right in terms of getting volunteers out to the right parts of town to count folks. And so we have to be a little bit careful about the trending of the data. For example, we have seen a rise in the last couple of years in our counts. There's also been a much more aggressive volunteer effort. But something I do want to note here that I think is important is that in those last 2 years, 2016 and 2017, one of the things you'll notice is that the percentage of unsheltered has increased. And I think that's fairly consistent with the experience of citizens in the community overall. So of those 3,800 roughly individuals, what do we know about them overall? Almost 80% of them are single individuals, unaccompanied. Another 20% are in families. And in those families, typically we have about 15% of all of the homeless individuals are children. In this case, 569 children were found homeless on that one night last year. The population is majority male. 66% male and 34% female, with a small number identifying as transgender. It's interesting, I think, to note, as you might expect, with homeless families, women are overrepresented. So that's where we find a lot of the women. And then in terms of race, a little over, I believe, 2/3 are African American, with the remainder predominantly being Caucasian. So we certainly have some disproportionality there in terms of the representation of African Americans. Some of the special populations that we look at year on year are listed here. One really important indicator is the number of people who are chronically homeless. And what that means is folks who have been continually homeless for a year or more, excuse me, or I believe it's 4 times in the last 3 years. So that number is about 14% of the total, around 540 people. That number has, in recent years, seen some decline as the population has been prioritized. We have 362 veterans last year on the streets, about 10%, which is a little bit below, I think, the national average. But it is a number that has been decreasing nationwide as we have directed some resources to veterans. About 11% are victims of domestic violence. And we also count annually unaccompanied homeless youth. So kids who are on the streets without parents. It's a fairly small number, but they are also very difficult to count because they tend to find themselves in places where the adults aren't. And there are some special efforts underway to get a better sense of that population.
Last night was the first PIP targeted specifically to kids.
Great.
I know that some of my staff went on it. I haven't heard yet how it went, but that was in order to focus on that particularly vulnerable and set of people that hide,
Right.
particularly are adept at hiding.
It'll be great to get that data. It's exciting. So the last two are serious mental illness and substance use disorder. And I think it's important to note that these, along with some of the other characteristics, are self-reported. So we have a 17% and 10% self-report rate on that. I think our data from our programs and from our healthcare partners tells us that that is far underrepresented for reasons that you can well imagine. So we talked a little bit, mentioned before that independent school districts are required and count school children who they identify as homeless. And the important thing here is that for the school districts, they not only count children who are literally homeless, sheltered, cars, etc., but they count children who are doubled up. So very vulnerably housed, families living together. For that reason, we identify very many more children in the school system. Across Dallas County, and I forget the number of school districts you have in the county, but it's 8 school districts.
Oh, school districts?
Right, so there are 8,759 school children that were identified as homeless, and 3,700 of those were in DISD. So I know that that has been a growing issue, and certainly as your rental market tightens, it becomes more of an issue in terms of both literal homelessness and families that are on the brink and are doubling up, living a couple families in a home. We spoke a little bit about criminal justice, and so Commissioner Daniel, as part of the BHLT, the Behavioral Health Leadership Team, the Homeless or Housing Committee, one of the things that that data has shown, I think, is the number of homeless individuals who are identified with mental health, as mental health patients, are coming through the jail system for particular periods, and that can be something that we look at in the future. In addition to Parkland, which I mentioned, there are a variety of other healthcare partners that have their own data sets I think we'll talk a little bit about how integrated that is in the community among those healthcare partners. But we have clinics, we have state hospital system where folks are go when they need to be hospitalized for behavioral health purposes as well. So finally, that's sort of a very quick and dirty, if you will, overview of the traits of the population. Sort of the next step is to begin to look at that population and understand better what the needs are of the population. And to that end, HUD has mandated since 2009 that communities begin to establish something called a coordinated assessment program, in some cases coordinated access. And there are three sort of core pieces of that. One is that there have to be clear points of entry to the system. You can imagine that in the past, for many, many years, individuals needing services would go from door to door to door of agencies looking for services, only to be told many times that there was not room for them. So immensely frustrating, immensely inefficient. And so the idea is that as a community, we say if you need services, here's either the one place you go to be assessed and referred, or maybe there are 5 places. The second piece is that there is a single assessment tool. Rather than everyone sort of, having their own assessment tool that says, we think you need transitional housing, we think you need permanent supportive housing, we think you need rapid rehousing. We need one tool that consistently looks at the population for everyone who comes together. And then finally, using that tool, how do we prioritize individuals for services? Because we know that there are capacity limitations in the system. So how are we going to decide who gets into housing first, or at least is prioritized? In most cases, communities are prioritizing what we think of as the most vulnerable individuals. That is how Dallas and Dallas County, as well as Collin County, are prioritizing folks. And when we talk about vulnerability in this context, it is primarily based on an assessment of the likelihood that those individuals would perish on the streets in the next year, right?
At this point, I would also like to mention that these kinds of forums are also opportunities for us to listen to particular needs. And in fact, through talking with a number of people who I know that I'm familiar with, making a special outreach to say, please come, and at the end of the meeting, there will be those opportunities to very specifically hear from folks. I personally have been doing my own outreach to locations that provide, for example, breakfast on Saturday mornings at various locations around the county, and talking with people and inviting them also to express their opinions, to express their needs, to so that we can get, I know that this is kind of official assessment, and then you've got to figure out, okay, what do we do with that information? Right. But at least to say, know that we are here to listen, to appreciate the fact that if we're not talking to people who are primarily impacted, then I think we're missing a bit.
Right. No, absolutely. This system does not replace outreach and human connection and that dialogue. It is a way of us as a community having a better idea. Because what we used to do is, agency A would say, well, we've got a wait list of 70 people, and the next agency would say, we've got a wait list of 300 people, et cetera, and we didn't really know, were those folks duplicated, et cetera. So the idea is that as MDHA moves forward, outreaching to the communities and having these conversations with homeless households, that we will have a better sense of really what the gaps are in the system, right? How much more rapid rehousing do we need, for example? So that is an ongoing process. We are not through it yet, but I think it will provide some of the data that we need for those next couple levels of analysis and discovery about the population.
When you talk about the data and about trying to just get cleaner data to be able to figure out what we're missing, if you could scale it and say, where we're at today, are we a 5 on a 10 scale or are we a 7 on a 10 scale?
I don't know that I would hazard a grade, but here's what I'll say that I think is really important. Certainly, as you know, if we don't have data, it's not good data. And on a national level, Dallas and Dallas County have rated among the lowest in participation in the homeless management information system. That means there are agencies in the community that are not entering the data, right? And so really our coverage of folks who are being served is incomplete. And that not only cripples us a little bit in understanding what is happening, but it hurts us with HUD, because that is in fact something that they look very specifically at. So it is really critical. I know that MDHA has been moving very assertively to expand that utilization, and it has been improving, but it will be something that's really important for this group to think about.
Well, I would say, as we're doing all these briefings, it's how do we move the ball down the field and do a better job than what we've done before. I know, depending on who you're talking to, it's either, well, they gave us, when they made us roll it out, it wasn't good enough for what we're doing, it wasn't nimble enough. Now, on the other side, there's, did they make us do it and we didn't want to do it? There's probably truth is somewhere in the middle, but I think as we continue to go through, I would suggest one of the things, if we continue to go through, what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, I think data cures a lot of problems. And I just want to ask one more question. Just kind of looking at the numbers dispassionately from what you kind of see as best practices around the country and just what cities and counties of our size, there's a couple things that stuck out to me. One, I see things from a Dallas role, and I always hear about DISD, but the fact that DISD, as big of a school district as it is, isn't even half the homeless population for children. I thought that caught me off guard. I don't think I would have guessed that. And the second thing was the amount of how our, forgive me, I don't remember what the slide said it, but the amount of units has decreased so much, or the amount of folks who are in short-term unsheltered.
Right.
How is it seems like it was steady and then it just drastically changed over a 2-year span. What do you sense out of that?
So I wish I had a better answer for you, because it's a question that's being asked in a lot of communities. It is something that we saw after several years of trending downward in some communities, particularly urban areas, saw a spike in 2016, 2017.
That's all across the country.
Correct. I live in Austin, and it was very visible, and it is that there are more folks who are unsheltered. I think that certainly the tightening of your rental market has something to do with that, but it is a question that we continue to ask ourselves as a sector and need to continue to think about.
Do you think it's reflective of the fact that more people are being counted versus maybe that we couldn't find them before or we weren't good at the counting?
Yes, so I don't necessarily think that is all of it. I mentioned that we have, some difficulty because we're always trying to improve our counting, right? And we should, but that may mean that we count more folks. However, the increase in the percentage of unsheltered seems to me that it's consistent with what is observed by citizens every day, and is something that we're seeing in other communities. So I think we're doing a better job of counting, but I do think there probably is something going on with the underlying data.
And the second question I have is relative to the unsheltered. Are they classified in any of these categories you talked about, those with mental illnesses, those with other kinds of illnesses? Are they preponderance of those folks that are unsheltered versus those that are sheltered? Is there a classification at all?
So I don't remember actually whether we break down the sheltered and unsheltered by those categories. We can look at it. And I'm sure that even outside of the point in time, we could get some information from our shelter partners, et cetera, and folks who are doing street outreach. I would think so, that we would see probably more untreated mental illness, et cetera, for the unsheltered population.
I would think that would be a very important
Yes.
fact to know.
Great.
So I'm looking at the point in time count. In 2013, 2015, and 2017, it went to 2,000, we're in the 2,000 numbers. So that's what you're saying, that we don't know why that is happening, if they receive permanent housing, or, because then if you look at 2013, and unsheltered was 251, but then it went down in 2014, but then it went back up in 2015, then it went way up,
Right.
50% in 2016. We don't have a way of tracking on why the numbers are fluctuating, and
So
are we
one
solving
thing,
problems for?
right, one thing I think we should do, Cindy Crane with MDHA could not be here today. She had pre-existing travel plans. But I think hearing from MDHA, the things that they have done to make our count much better, will give us a feel for what's going on there. I think both things are happening. We're improving our coverage of the count, and there probably are more unsheltered homeless. We need to try to figure out what the mix
And
is.
it's going on across the country, too.
Yes,
So that it isn't just what's happening in Dallas. So there are,
Correct.
I agree with you, there are probably a variety of factors that affect that particular trend.
I guess I would just like to understand the factors that's impacting it.
But at least we're collecting information from a variety of sources now, too. So I know that we're doing more in the jail and looking at homeless people there. The shelters, I see Salvation Army's chief person is here, and, you know, her insights into what some of those changes, what's going on with Dallas Housing Authority, and, you know, how they're weighing in, what's going on in particular with the mental health will be another part of that.
But I guess I had another question on the demographic profile. When you just did transgender, you didn't do LGBT, you didn't do all to know?
well, this was,
3,789.
was gender identification rather than sexual orientation, right?
Then, I guess, and then on that one more, there is only black and white, there was no other races?
There are some very other, probably under 1% overall. We can get that breakdown for you, but vast majority African American and Caucasian.
That was interesting.
Dr. Sharice.
Okay.
Back to the point in time count, it looks like the delta is there's been a significant reduction in the number of sheltered. I mean, you know, while the unsheltered's going up, the overall number hasn't changed that
Right.
much, and so perhaps the shelters have the answer there, because that's where the drop is.
Yes, I think that bears some investigation with our shelter partners. One question I had is, I remember that the bridge opened in 2008, right? And so I don't remember precisely when it happened, but it was overfull at the beginning, absolutely overflowing, and eventually they began to decide that they really needed, for a variety of reasons, to lower that census night on night. But I'm sure there's more going on there, so that's a question that we can and work on getting information.
Going back to race, is this using like the traditional government categories of black, white, Asian, or
Correct.
instead of Hispanic, non-Hispanic? So
Correct.
that's not an
That's right.
ethnicity that's broken out?
Correct.
So that would be in the white group?
That's right. And we can pull that out, but the numbers are relatively small.
Yeah, that's the traditional federal
All right, does anyone else have any questions? All right, well, thank you very much.
I'd like to take just a moment. There was a little bit of an oversight on our, the consideration and possible approval of bylaws piece, and it's kind of a housekeeping point here. One of our board members, Rick Banowski, is no longer on the MDHA board. So that would then go up to the board being able, I see John Castanedas sitting here, and thank you very much for coming, of their selecting somebody else to be on this board. So it would be one of those little tasks on your plate for the next time, if that'd be okay. Because we definitely need that particular aspect because obviously the very strong efforts of MDHA are interwoven through absolutely everything that we will be talking about here.
All right, wonderful. Well, so now we're going to go into, coming out of our last meeting, when the mayor's task force had started working on, under Britton Branowski, their recommendation solutions based on what they believe that we should do for homelessness. They came up with effectively 7 solutions, and so that's a lot. So what we're going to do today is go over the first 3 and give you guys a chance to really deep dive into that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Daniels.
Thank you very much. Went back and just took a little bit of a review of the, has been referenced that Dallas County has a behavioral health leadership team, which was started 10, 11 years ago as a focal point in Dallas County to address mental health issues in the county. It became apparent that one of the underlying problems related to mental health and addressing the issues was the ability to have people housed and having a point of contact for people with mental health issues. Therefore, a subset of the behavioral health leadership team was created, and it was called the Behavioral Health Housing Work Group, in order to focus a little bit more on those particular items. The first meeting of the housing work group was on February 27th, 2014. So it's been almost exactly 4 years ago to the day that there was the beginning focus on that. Looking at the notes that were taken from that meeting, they really sound very much, I hate to say, about a lot of the things that we continue to talk about now. With permanent supportive housing being up there front and center, of current programs and resources, and trying to do that assessment of that. Another very strong piece that came out in the very beginning was the collection of data, and the fact that there always have been difficulties in collecting the information related to homeless populations, and that it hasn't changed. In those first groups, we did have a cross-section of people who appeared to be stakeholders in what was going on. It was not only the Dallas County and the services that we provide to seniors, to children, and in the variety of housing programs. There's also the city of Dallas and all that it does through the Dallas Housing Authority and through its variety of housing and service programs. There also was just a wide range of other people who were impacted, so that we ended up with about 67 people who are regularly kept apprised of what's going on. There's always been a strong part from Parkland, for example, and how are hospitals dealing with people in their emergency rooms, for example, and I know the private hospitals are in the exact same situation. The funders at the time, like in 2014, Value Options was the major funder for mental health services, and offered its particular view of what was going on with that population. The North Texas Behavioral Health Authority in 2017 then had been sunsetted by our Texas legislature, therefore had gone through a major reorg and a re-looking at how mental health services are provided. And I think at this point are now have completed contracts with service providers and are beginning to set up the pieces of that. Part of what we were looking at too was that in Dallas County we're missing large chunks of what would be a continuum of care for homeless people whether they have mental health issues or not. So that one of the, in addition to figuring out better ways of collecting data, of keeping tabs on the resources available for both providers of services and for consumers of services, but also recognizing that if a person who is unsheltered gets picked up by the police, that there are very few places for local law enforcement to take those people. So the immediate need of what's being termed a respite center, or kind of a halfway spot for somebody who has broken a law, but jail may not be the best place, or has a medical need, but Parkland Emergency Room likewise may not be the best place for them. And I'm very proud to say that through a lot of efforts from a lot of different people in our community, that in 2018, 2 of those halfway stations are going to be opened up, with one of them anchored by Homeward Bound and all that it provides in mental health services, along with the North Texas Behavioral Health Authority, plus the supporting services around there, as well as Parkland. The second location is St. Jude's, which is a Catholic Charities sponsor, but along with Dallas City and Dallas County, working together with service providers to, in the northern part of the county, provide some of those assists. So I'm proud to say that of that housing work group that started meeting, that we're pulling people together, looking at what's going on with the Meadows Foundation and with the Carew Smart Justice, and how does that fit into us being able to better provide for people that are having some issues with housing in particular, but also a myriad of other problems, and therefore really appreciate the support that's going on in the philanthropic world, and how we're beginning to really do the deep dives that we need to take. In fact, I was in Memphis, Tennessee yesterday at a national conference where the discussion was data-driven justice, and how Caruth and Meadows and the Arnold Foundation, a variety of other partners around the country are addressing how we can better provide information to help us in this endeavor. I also see Jim Mattingly over here, and looking at the private sector, because I think one of the things, and the reason that we're here, in fact, is that none of us, not any one of the entities in the room, have been able to, by ourselves, address the complexity of the homeless problem. And it isn't that we haven't tried, it isn't that we don't have good, smart people working on sheltering, working on the provision of services, on transportation, on the development of permanent supportive housing, and working with landlords to see how we can do a better job of this. I don't think that's what it is, but we recognize that we really do need to reach out and maximize, leverage relationships and connections that we do have. And so I particularly appreciate the role of landlords and their willingness to work with the Dallas Housing Authority to do a better job at creating interface. Obviously, we're not there yet. We don't have total control. We don't have total control of the marketplace. And it's been noted time and time again that at 98% occupancy, we are in a good place in some respects, except when it comes to working with the most vulnerable in our populations and seeing what we can do. I'm also looking at Dr. Cerise and realizing that the healthcare world is also in a little bit of a world of flux, which adds to it.
No, never healthcare in flux.
But on the other hand, I think through with the housing work group, one of the major pieces that came out of that, though, was that people were sitting down in a room once a month talking about a whole variety of issues that a lot of practitioners, people who come in contact day by day, and homeless people, bringing their opinions together of seeing how we can improve things. And there have been, those linkages have been strengthened, and that the trust that you have to develop, that much of it coming out of the behavioral health leadership team, because I think that's where a lot of that nucleus was, so that Dallas County, from what I can tell, is a little ahead of the game, and that we do have the relationships, and we are working on, for example, the MOUs to link up the housing data with the healthcare data, so that we have a better idea of those individuals, how many times they have been in jail, how many times have they been at the emergency room, what kind of treatment are they receiving, so that if one of our agencies sees an individual, they have an idea of whether or not they're on mental health medications and whether they're taking them.
Is that something when you have that kind of fully up and running, how do you link that? Can you link that to what we're doing from where people are staying? Like if they're in a shelter, is there a point where that ever, or with HIPAA?
That would be
There's
the
a lot of
goal.
reasons you can't do that.
Right.
And one of, which leads to another issue about those regulations, laws, statutes that are in place that keeps you from doing matter like that. There are still HIPAA rules to those
Right.
issues. And having people, meaning Will, looking at a medical record, the doctor would be able to speak to it better. But I don't know that that's a course of action you can take without the proper exception to those regulations, right? Whether it be waiver, or whether it be whatever the case may be. I don't know them, and I've been in healthcare a long time, and I don't know them to be in place as of now.
But we're working at it, is what I'm saying. And
Absolutely.
around the country, and I know that John Castaneda, and I know that Salvation Army, and a variety of other people are working at what are those 12 data points that we need, respecting HIPAA, respecting FERPA, respecting CJIS. I mean, because the criminal justice piece fits in there too, but figuring out ways, in fact, that we can do that data sharing to the level that we need to, but also protect the privacy of individuals.
Yeah, I figured about the HIPAA rules, but I guess where I was going with that, and I didn't realize everything that you had already done, and I think that's amazing, but as we're going through this process where we've been doing great, say on the county side, and we've been doing poor on the city side, or vice versa.
No, not at all.
But as we're doing this as a group, it seems like one of the things, we know a couple things. We know, one, we don't have the data to know what we don't know, because we can't. And two is, we can't, it does not seem, even in our homeless counts, that we can follow a person from where they entered, for lack of a better way of saying, the homeless arena, to how to get them out, and how do we take work that you're already doing and work that you're doing, and how do we marry that to the new, to HMIS and all that. And that's where I was going with it, is how do we make it to where because if one thing's a cause and one thing's an outcome, how do we link that better together? And that's why I asked it, because I just don't know.
Sure.
Well, and that's why I think the people around this table in the two advisory committees are so critical in order to maximize what we can do
Sure.
with respect. I
Sure.
mean, that's because,
And I'm certainly not one to be here to say what we can't do and put a period behind that. What I'm suggesting is, one of the issues that we've had is barriers to success,
Right.
which seem like common sense. An example is Dallas Housing Authority received a phone call from you, and we take that phone call because we're excited about helping in this particular initiative, and you asked for us to provide housing for a set of people that you had in mind. I'd have to take into consideration who's already in line.
right, absolutely.
The fair housing rules
That's right.
prohibit me from
That's right.
listening to you and not listening to Bernadette.
That's right.
So what we've done is come in this environment in which we thought waivers to regulations could be taking place with others. Well, then we pursued them, and we've got them, and we've turn them into policy that does allow us to do just that, give the time, the attention, the preferential treatment to those urgent matters that come with things like storms, comes with things like good population counts of homeless populations in the community, and saying, what can we do about permanent housing here? So some of those restrictions, we've gotten waivers to those restrictions, and we have policy in place locally that will be a little bit more sensitive now and able now than we were. And those are recent.
And it's very much appreciated, and I know one of the areas is the Dallas Housing Authority looked at the paperwork that was required by landlords and saying, okay, is there a way that we could make that a smoother process?
Sure.
And that willingness to participate, that willingness to at least sit down and talk about it, I think is a big step forward.
Sure.
And I think that's one of the things too that is a result of these kinds of meetings, of recognizing that bottom line, that we do have the same goals in mind. We each sit in different chairs, and we all live in a legal world, and so all of us are law-abiding citizens, so we have to keep those parameters in mind without a doubt.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean that we can't have the conversation and do what we can in order to leverage that part of it. So,
we found as patients will agree to share information too. So there is stuff that you can share across agencies, and you can restrict it to sort of the key information. And so it's relevant information, and that's the part that is easier to do, and they're agreeing to share that, so some of their healthcare needs are shared with the social service agencies that we're working with, and that's been a big plus.
And one thing, Doc, I think you will agree, and if you don't let me pollute the meeting with bad information, but one of the things health systems are doing better today than we certainly did 10 years ago, perhaps 5. We're doing a very good job, I believe, of getting that last mile in on that electronic medical record, right? So my record here is indeed in a digital form that I can transfer over to another system, assuming that there's some kind of bridge if those two systems are different, right? So that'll allow that sharing of information, and with the proper exception to the regulation, you can have people in the business of helping homeless in shelters and things, having access to things that the patients have given them permission to do, right? I don't see anybody around the table that may be, but that mental health court judge, right?
I do not see, Judge Mays had been at the first meeting that we had here, but I do not see her today. But the courts also play a very definite role.
Because they can take, they can take the patient out of it, right? In some cases.
That's right. They have a great say, and looking at all that's going on with court diversion programs and just the whole variety of things that we are doing with pretrial release, and there's a lot of work going on to make the courts and the jail system work more efficiently.
Sure.
And not keep people.
By no means do we want to
unnecessarily.
say that mental health is the cause of health. That's not it. But while we're talking about mental health, we can't say, oh, mental health judges. I really think going all the way back to Oz Christman 100 years ago, it seems, he wouldn't like that, but I was there 100 years ago when those courts were created. And it's been great to have those mental health courts.
Yes,
So many people don't know we have mental health courts.
that's right.
That you can petition the court for the time for relief you need to help a patient.
You're absolutely right.
But one of the reasons that we're here is the fact that, to your exact point, I didn't know we had mental health courts.
Sure.
I can't tell you half the things that you have access to that you can provide. I think what I would always say that we need to focus on in this group, that I think is kind of our mission, is the fact that we know, and I think you said it, there's cause and effects. There's causes, whether that is loss of opportunity, loss of job, mental health, name your thing. And then there's people who play in the space of effects. The provider, the shelter that takes in the person, and knowing that there's a cause, there's an effect, and how do we balance that together to provide strategies and policies that allow us to go from point A to point B in a quicker manner than we do today.
The last point I'd like to make related to the housing work group is that it was a unanimous support letter that went from the housing work group to the city of Dallas in looking at the homeless commission and its creation, the work that it did, and in the creation of this kind of a body, because it was recognized that a broader umbrella needed to be created to address so many of the issues that seem to be slipping off on this plate of spaghetti, as I call it. But with that, I'd like to then say that we recognize that our work was not done yet, and so here we are. So if be okay to turn to the Charlotte Sharp and the City of Dallas's efforts on the encampments and what's going on today.
Good afternoon. So again, I'm, excuse me, Charlotte Sharp. And so the city has a new Office of Homeless Solutions. And so there's a little bit of background described here that I won't go through in much detail for the sake of time. But with the new Office of Homeless Solutions, it was it's a part of a new structure in effort to be able to align the homeless services that are provided throughout the city and address the fragmentation. And so this was a part of the city manager's reorganization, which is also consistent with restructuring on the council committee level. And so before, we only had a housing and economic development committee where public service issues would be addressed, and now there's a human and social needs council committee that allows us to be able to focus more on specific needs related to the homeless as well as other disadvantaged populations. And so with this new office, we're really intentional on making sure that accountability is increased, that we have data that drives our decisions, and that we are clear on what our outcomes need to be. So every decision that's being made needs to be directly related to a desired outcome, and becoming less about transactions, counting widgets and the basic contract administration, but also working from a system standpoint and encouraging collaboration and equitability. Oh, so I have mentioned here too, so that particularly as it relates to street outreach, we've enhanced our street outreach to become more housing focused and added a component to this office that focuses on community mobilization. And so here's a list of our operations that talks about building those systems as well as the targeted outreach, our relationship with the Citizen Homelessness Commission, which is the advisory committee to the Dallas Area Partnership. The office actually will be responsible for the implementation of the bond that was approved for the homeless facilities and units that can be added to the community. And then we also serve as our implementation partner for the Dallas Area Partnership. So as it relates specifically to street outreach, when the new office, as a part of the restructure with the new office, crisis intervention that was a part of the Dallas Police Department was merged under the office. And so with the office staff that had come from the housing department that focused on outreach as well as crisis intervention, when we merged them, we were able to increase from 3 dedicated street outreach workers in the city of Dallas and to now we have 12 positions. And so that was a significant increase and improvement in how we operate, because again, there was fragmentation, there wasn't consistency in the way that we collect data, and now we make sure that we're doing by name lists. All staff have access and are entering data in the homeless management information system so that we can be able to help make sure that those that we engage are being prioritized for housing, and that we have that appropriate documentation to reflect what their vulnerabilities may be, as well as any barriers that exist. And so I have this process described here that basically begins in what we use or refer to as our 311 system, which is the system that citizens and other stakeholders are able to enter complaints into as it relates to encampments or where homeless individuals are. And so through that, we are very intentional to make sure that citizens are being responded to, that we're doing in a timely manner, that we're coordinating with other departments, such as the Dallas Police Department and Code Enforcement and even the Parks Department. And our main goal is to make sure that we're addressing the health and safety issues that's related to not only those that are housed in the communities where these encampments are located, but those that are unhoused, right? And so homeless, we're wanting to make sure that those persons that are experiencing homelessness are in healthy and safe situations. And so a part of that engagement is not only saying that we can refer you to a service, but connecting you to make sure that if you're willing to go to the shelter, a bed is available for you. If you need mental health services, then we be able to connect you to that. If a birth certificate is your only issue or your ID, then we address those specific issues. And so another way that we've expanded our work as it relates to street outreach and the encampments is our site reclamation, the concept of site reclamation, where we're looking at not only hardening sites that may have been encampments, meaning putting up a fence. That's one way to address some of the issues of where there are unsafe, unhealthy encampment areas, but also looking at how we repurpose areas for uses that make them less desirable to be an encampment site. And so that may include improving the lighting. That may include zero-scapes type landscaping. So whether that's with rocks or other landscaping options, or looking at if it should be repurposed for a dog park, or, you know, it would vary depending on the community. But again, repurposing that area so that it somehow becomes more visibly appealing for the community and an asset to the community, but also less likely to return to an encampment site. And so that's pretty much what we've done with the city. That is one component of many of our responsibilities. And so we wanted to give you an update on the role that the city has in it and what actions have been taken since this report has been published.
I had a question.
Yes, ma'am.
The street team, you said it went from 3 to 12.
Yes, ma'am.
With the street team, are they working on our coordinated services, like with the 2 individuals that were found in South Dallas? Is that street team is going to ensure that there are beds available, shelters available, and if they're working with various churches to open up the doors when we're having 15 below freezing, is that kind of
yes,
what
ma'am.
it would do?
And so one of our with that specific situation, we had to go back and make sure, did we go to that area and engage individuals that were present at that area and encourage them to, you know, or let them know that we could take them to the emergency shelter option. So that's definitely a part of our role, whether it's with inclement weather or just any day. We're always trying to make sure that, again, we're not only offering services, but that we can actually connect them to services. And so we actually just hired a new street outreach and resource manager, and one of her first charges is to let's talk with our stakeholders and have more formal agreements about how we go from a person that's unsheltered to the actual identified service that they're in need of.
So when you said they're divided by areas, street team, there's some
They're
south,
assigned,
west,
correct.
east, is that how the areas are quads?
They're assigned to, it's aligned with the Dallas Police Department's patrol divisions. So we have 2 that are assigned to the northern district. So that's northeast, north central, northwest.
So in South Dallas, that would be the southeast?
Southwest and south central.
So there are 2 street
that are
people
assigned
to that. So with the cold weather going on, that is their responsibility to ensure that
we've communicated and connected all individuals with resources, and that includes getting by name information. So even with the individuals, the names that have been released, we were able to go back and check and say, was that a person that we were in contact with? When was the last contact that was made? We are able to look in, of course, HMIS and see, you know, which service providers.
that part of that would be a city's responsibility in assuring that.
But it's also that working together part.
With other service providers,
Right.
right.
Who holds the ultimate responsibility to make sure the
Because-
work, it
because
would be
they-
the city, and then they coordinate out with various organizations that's in that
At the
space.
same time, too, the Dallas Police Department has
Correct.
really stepped up and amplified their team approach on their patrolling.
Correct.
And their usual,
And I guess just understanding, because that happened in a community that I represent, so it's a lot of talk about who's responsible for ensuring that our citizens are, when they are homeless or in that predicament, is there not churches that are open, that are emergency shelters?
Yes,
How do they
ma'am.
know who's saying, hey, do you want to go to emergency shelter?
Yes.
Let me take your name. So that is
And
that's a conversation that's in the
Correct.
community. And so I was unable to answer the question of who's responsible to even make sure something's being addressed to ensure that the citizens are.
And that's an area where we need more coordination, and so this is a conversation we just had on yesterday with a number of service providers, because the Continuum of Care, the lead agency for the Continuum of Care, did issue out communication to say, these are the shelters that are open, and this is how many they will accept. And street outreach providers or street outreach staff at a number of organizations were able to go out and engage their clients that they're working with. So it's just, we have to coordinate
I'm
it.
able to answer questions to my
Yes, ma'am,
constituents.
understood.
Because those two individuals, somebody's grandfather, father, mother, brother, they're somebody who loves them, and so it was very daunting. So now I know how the process works.
Yes, ma'am.
So when we are educated, we're empowered to say, hey, this is a number you can call to say, or tell them where to go.
one of the other things that was going on during this particular cold system was the Dallas Emergency Shelter Collaborative Inclement Weather Plan that I know was broadcasted quite extensively with all of the shelter organizations. The policy is included here, and then it had the shelter, the overflow capacity, and some of the particular details about it. And I know.
But I didn't know, and a lot of people in our community didn't know.
Well, we'll make
didn't know
sure that,
this.
first of all,
So-
everybody on this body will
Should
get
know.
absolutely everything that crosses by through the county, and I'm thinking that, between the city and the county and shelters and the variety of people getting out notices,
Okay,
we'll get better at that communication piece.
thank you.
To what level do you engage the churches and the communities, particularly, and I say that because one of the people that died in the cold actually was well known to a pastor in the community. He knew exactly who he was and had seen him out. And so I think a lot of community churches know these people. And to what level of communication do you have to those churches that are actually on the front lines in these neighborhoods?
So we've definitely strengthened that since the office has existed, particularly with that community mobilization piece that we've added, and being able to have more staff so that they can attend neighborhood meetings, but also build relationships with other stakeholders, which includes the faith-based community. So that's a new component that we had worked on that before, but of course we didn't have as much capacity to be as impactful. And so now that there are dedicated folks to those different patrol divisions, then that helps us to have time to build stronger relationships and know who those key stakeholders are.
Looking back at MDHA, because I know that you've been working on the faith-based component for a couple of years now, haven't you?
And actually, Charlotte and
I
are
assume.
working on a faith collaborative committee where all different interfaiths come together and we discuss and we're riveting in. And actually out of that, a couple of churches in the area have opened up their doors and kind of become inclement weather shelters, kind of based on that riveting model that we've been talking to that group with.
Right.
Communication is golden.
Sorry.
Well, I just wondered, does the office have measurable impact goals? Why do you exist? And you know exactly month to month whether you're meeting those goals?
So the office was formally effective October 1. And so we also hired an operations research analyst so that we can make sure that we're developing common goals that can be measured across all of our contracts and the services that we provide, so that we can do exactly what you're saying. Now, of course, any contracts we have in place, there are already specific measures as far as who was served, who was placed into housing, how much engagement existed if there was an increase in income. So there are measures that are being tracked, but we want to be able to have apples to apples, uniform goals across all contracts. And so we're in that development stage to make sure that we're tracking the right goals and that they're appropriate for the office.
One of those goals include coordination with all the providers that are providing very similar services?
Yes, ma'am. So if you've, or for those that have seen the bid that we've recently put out for the Emergency Solutions Grant, we were very intentional to say that proposers that respond to it will be required to coordinate, collaborate, and also even address more equitable services so they're not just concentrated.
So in the future, at some of these meetings, we could ask for a report on how the office is achieving these goals, have them listed and
Yes,
where
ma'am.
the progress you're making towards them.
Yes, ma'am.
So actually, that was a lot of what I was going to ask, was the coordination, because when I hear 12 people, and I know that's much better than 3.
It's still not a lot.
But when you look at covering the area you're covering and the people you're covering and, these 3,700 identified individuals.
We can't do it alone.
It's really a lot, but you have, the folks in the mental health sector, DISD, that can identify folks in these inclement weather situations, and if we could do a better job of getting everyone coordinated so we know everyone,
Yes.
and we can really reach out to specific people,
Yeah,
not just a general group, but
I think
to
this whole
specific
coordinated
people we know.
assessment issue is coordination, and so different entities being set up are wonderful, but it's the coordination that really is the key. And how can we move towards better coordination? And if everyone has that goal, and it's a measurable goal, I think that would say a lot.
I guess I think of things as, are there ways that we can communicate better? Can we
Right.
get, all of our caseworkers to have an app that gets a certain message that says, inclement weather, these, here's where you can access, some kind of search by zip code, to really get this information out on the street in ways that people who are working the street, this is what they live by, and just a, better response. So let's think of ways to communicate.
I agree.
If we had it perfect, and we could communicate perfectly, and everybody had an app, everybody had every resource, we knew every shelter and every overflow and every church and every overflow, we have a night a week from now that's 10 degrees, how many beds are we short for the people who need one?
That's a great question.
Hundreds.
I think that's the biggest question is, we can do it perfect, and if we're still short, we're still failing. And so how do we get from failing to passing? And I think that's the number that we need to know.
Well, and there are buildings. I mean, we know there's buildings around, we know there's space, but when you're talking about taking the population in, you're also talking about safety.
Sure.
And so how do we assist these places that could open with the need to provide the staff and the coverage and the food and
Security.
the safety that would go with that? So I think that that's a piece that we might find we have more resources if we could develop a plan to actually manage
That's
the
hopeful.
space.
Absolutely. I'd love to follow up on that.
Yeah,
'cause
that's a big star on that one.
Mhm.
I mean, I tell you, to that point, because when it gets cold, our ER fills up, our lobby fills up, and the cases that are difficult to place, so the individuals at the shelters won't take for whatever reason.
Right.
And so we found that when the cold surge, people were accommodating and would take, during the day when they wouldn't ordinarily take during the day and that sort of stuff. But what I heard from our folks was there's still a subset that, for whatever reason,
There's
it's
the
safety
rule
reason,
breakers.
they're just not going to go.
Yeah,
right?
that aren't allowed back to shelters and that type of thing, so.
Moving along, thank you very much for that, and I know that we'll be keeping up with it. Another part of this is the criminal justice side. So Ms. White is going to come forward to talk about the navigation program in the criminal justice system.
Good afternoon. My name is Joyce White, as Commissioner Daniel has said. I know that the agenda talks about housing navigation program for criminal justice and treatment, but I'm responsible for the criminal justice piece, and Carol Lucky's going to speak very briefly about how they handle the treatment part.
Already?
Yes, go ahead, and then I'll talk about it.
Well, she just threw
Go
it
right
at me.
ahead.
In working on the criminal justice treatment part, there's, I guess, several factors that NIPA is very involved in. A lot of it has to do with outpatient competency restoration, and that's a process that can happen to assist people in establishing their competency and generally getting their charges dropped and moved on out of the system. And establishing their competency is key. So they understand what they're being charged with, but if they don't understand that, there's obviously some kind of mental health that's impairing their ability to move forward and seek housing and those type of things. So that's a very intensive program we work with, and also we're working real closely with the different hospitals. And I'm going to say one, I'll give this real broad overview, but I would like to, this very specific program that we're involving our medical director in and our staff in developing ways to also address the needs at the hospital, getting our teams, quick assessment type teams into the hospitals, making sure people are getting to the right place as they move through the system. And it's actually a pretty complicated process. I'd like to have some slides to go with that. So we'll, if we could, we'll bring that back to the table next time.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to say that because Carol and I talked right before, and so, like she said she'd like to do a full presentation, so I
She
just
gave
wanted
me
her to
like
get that
1
out of
minute to
the way.
prepare.
So, for the criminal
That's
justice,
true.
a full minute, criminal justice department, basically, the thought behind this is to first create the program to see, okay, what are our needs, what do we need to do, what are our goals, and so we wanted to look at, so where do I point this? There we go. No, wait a minute. There you go. So we're going to start off with kind of how this program is funded, what's the purpose, and what's the structure. So the funding for the Housing Navigator position, which is the one I hold, comes from the Medicaid 1115 waiver, Dallas County Crisis Services Project. Many of us are aware of that, some are not. So that's where the funding comes from. The purpose of the Housing Navigation Program, so it's not just a person, it's an entire program that perspective that we have. Our program purpose is to connect the homeless clients that book into jail, particularly those with mental illness, with sustainable housing resources that contribute to health and wellness. So really, all of the folks booking into jail that have been identified as homeless, just kind of start working with them to figure out what the needs are, how do we get them connected and that sort of thing. I do want to mention that criminal justice, and this may be, I've been doing my research and across the country, is now being brought into the whole homeless conversation and what do we do, because folks are booking in as homeless. And so here, the same way, we are brought into that conversation and what is our part and what do we do. And so that's kind of the background for this. We did create a program plan, and so the goals of the Housing Navigation Program for Criminal Justice are accurately identify homeless clients at booking. So we've got a way that we're kind of looking at them, but we want to drill down even deeper to make sure we're getting an accurate count of who comes in as homeless. The next goal is make housing resources available to Dallas County Criminal Justice staff that work with clients. So the judges, the attorneys, the case managers and all of that. Instead of each person trying to run out and figure out what's going on, we wanted this position and this program to bring those resources to them. So as they're making decisions.
Are you enhancing communication with this?
I'm sorry?
Are you enhancing communication with this?
I just talk loud?
No.
Oh, what do you mean?
By creating this, we've talked a little bit about being comprehensive.
Right.
And trying not to duplicate, but educating people as we go along so that we're all at a better level and that interface so that we can do a better job.
Absolutely. And so when we get to the slide about what we did last year, Commissioner Daniels, I'm going to talk just a little bit more about that. I'm trying to be as brief as possible and talk fast and still allow you guys to hear what I'm talking about. The next one is support a reduction in the rate of recidivism through stable housing options, and that's a big one, and that is in line with smart justice across the country to really figure out how do we reduce that high utilizer cycling in and out of the jail. And so that our housing program plan, we want to affect that, and so that's one of our major outcome categories that we're looking at. Lastly, participate in the Homeless Management Information System, HMIS, to support continuum of care homeless funding for DCCJ client access. So criminal justice, we wanted to figure out how can we get in the game? How can we also participate in HMIS? Because what we've talked about with MDHA and is that we do the point in time count and everything, but folks who are sitting in jail who were homeless when they booked in on the night of the count they're not counted. Some of the, if they've been in less than 90 days, so they're still homeless. So if they're sitting in jail and they booked in as homeless, unless they've been in jail for a week and they were homeless before they came in, then they're not in that count necessarily, right? So we need to pull that in. So we've got chunks of folks that, like we said, we want to tighten up the count, and so everybody needs to come to the table, and that's one of our goals. The structure of the Housing Navigation Program, the Housing Navigator position is contracted through Transicare, so I work for Transicare, and Dallas County contracts my position. Next slide. Okay. Housing Navigator responsibilities in terms of our program. Create, administer, and monitor housing navigation program plans. So really create a plan for that, not just run around doing stuff. Collaborate with community and supportive housing, health, mental health, and ancillary service providers to assist with the service integration for DCCJ clients. Once again, really bringing these clients to life. How do we get those services to them? And collaborating, like Commissioner Daniels said, with the providers and what's going on in the community. And how our clients could access that, seeing as though they're in jail or they're coming out of jail. Conduct research on criminal justice involved clients, housing and homelessness trends, available resources and processes for service access. So I do a lot of research, connecting with folks, connecting with agencies, what's going on across the country and things like that, and bringing that information back to inform what we're doing. Provide housing resource trainings to DCCJ departments and service provider teams that work directly with DCCJ clients. So we did that, and you'll see that in the next slide. Once we get this information and we're talking to folks, we really want to bring that back to the internal staff and, like I said, judges, attorneys, and staff, so that they will have the information. Work directly with Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance to create customized HMIS data entry protocols appropriate for DCCJ clients. Dallas County Criminal Justice has some needs that are a little bit different as it relates to HMIS and what we need to be able to do and not do. And so I'll talk about that in a minute on what we did last year. So we've partnered with MDHA to work on that. Work with housing programs in the community that directly assist DCCJ clients. So understand who's out there, what they're doing, how do our clients get access, and how do we keep that communication going. And of course provide any requested reports and evaluations. So here's what we did last year. Last year's when it started, right? This position was created December 2016, right before Christmas. So last year we had to kind of get everything going. So last year was creation. We created a draft housing navigation program plan. So that plan actually exists. We talked to a lot of folks to figure out what do we need to be focusing on. I mentioned those goals, so that plan exists. We work with community partners and administered housing resource and HMIS training to assertive community treatment, or ACT, and forensic assertive community treatment FACT teams that work with DCCJ clients. So there are ACT and FACT teams that work within the criminal justice system, service providers, and so we did a training with them, partnered with NIPA, partnered with Meadows, and brought that training together in terms of bringing in a housing piece. Because what we know is we have case managers running around doing stuff, and now we're asking them also to get them into housing. And housing is its own discipline, if you will. So we did that, developed and disseminated housing resource and funding source information, so we got that information out, worked with MDHA to develop a customized HMIS form for DCCJ data entry. So basically, HMIS has it's a portal. You go in and you enter all of this, your information. You've got to enroll the client, period. Okay, you got a lot to do anyway. What we did is we worked with them to create a shorter form, because our clients are not in jail that long. We can't do background, a whole lot of stuff. So they were great, and they helped us create a shorter form, so we did that. We worked to create a high utilizer classification, because now that you've got high utilizers in the system and we want to prioritize them, we need to know, how do we add in the criminal justice piece to the housing priority list, and so we did that. So let me jump over. So this year, okay, we go. This year, we're going to implement the plan, so we're just taking the next steps. One of the things we also are doing is we're working with the Catholic Charity St. Jude program. So Dallas County did provide some funding there, and we've got some beds set aside, so we are planning to work with them to get our folks in there as well. And those are the main things, get more involved with HMIS and really get those things going. So this year is implementation, last year was creation. And my contact information.
Continue to hear.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Great.
All righty, next up, Dana Gray.
Hello again. So one of the things that we wanted to do as we move forward to lay the groundwork, if you will, is to talk about the stakeholders in the system. Now, just in our conversation today, we have probably mentioned already 12 or 15 different organizations or entities, and it is a very diverse and large field. So particularly since we've referred to some of those organizations already, and in the interest of time, because I think we're running a little bit behind, I'll make this pretty quick, but I want to frame this as not just us informationally knowing who's out there doing what, but particularly for the partnership to think about the role it can play that's unique in the community and that isn't duplicative. Here it goes. And as we talk about that, I wanted to use something called collective impact as a framework. I'm sure some of you have talked about that in your other professional lives, et cetera. But basically, collective impact is a way of thinking about collaborating to solve very sticky, persistent social problems that require action from a multitude of sectors, right? It impacts not just education, for example, but as we've heard, criminal justice, housing, healthcare, et cetera. And collective impact talks about collaboration, not just program to program, where, you know, your case manager calls the clinic, for example, so healthcare and case management are working together, but collaboration really at a higher system level, so that we work together to design the system that will solve the problem. And so the 5 elements of collective impact are, first of all, a shared agenda. Your shared agenda is in your name. You are the Dallas Partnership to Prevent and End Homelessness. And so that is your overarching goal. And there will be other priorities underneath that, but it's very important as a community at large, not just the partnership, to share those goals. And we've talked a lot about measurement systems today. So as we talk about ending homelessness, how are we going to measure that? Not just in the number on the street, but how do we know we're doing better? Mutually reinforcing activities. And so what that means is not everyone has to do the same thing. But then when I look, for example, as the county at what the city is doing, I think about whether what the county is doing is complementing that, and that we look at that really across the system. Continuous communication is a theme we've had today, and then backbone support, just acknowledging that this work of transforming systems is serious and will require some support on the human capital side and organizational side. So again, we'll talk about the stakeholders, we'll talk about sort of the activities that they engage in and some of the resources they can bring to the table, and then again, what the partnership can contribute. So at this point, I actually want to have us bring up the organizational chart. So at the first meeting, you may recall that both the city and the county had provided an example of preliminary thinking about sort of the relationship of the different entities in the environment as related to the Dallas Area Partnership. And so we've put those 2 charts into the pot and swirled them around and come out with this beautiful, beautiful representation here, which is really a representation of how information flows into the partnership. City of Dallas already had a Citizens Homeless Commission that was initiated late last year, and the county has the intent to, or is establishing its own. We also clearly want to be receiving explicit feedback from MDHA and from the service providers at large. To that end, what has been conceptualized is actually a joint advisory committee. so that each of these 4 entities, designate 2 members to sit on a joint advisory committee to the Dallas Area Partnership. And then where you see City of Dallas and Dallas County Leadership Team, that is really the staff on the ground who will be advising the partnership. So let's then go back to the PowerPoint. And we can come back to this for discussion perhaps after we go through the slides. There you go. Oh, so close.
Can I ask a question quickly? So the Commission on Homelessness, which I sat on last year, has wrapped up.
Correct.
So is there going to be a new commission?
There is a new commission.
Oh, there is. So didn't know.
Citizens Homeless, am I getting the name right? Citizens Homelessness Commission, which is a citizens advisory board to particularly to the city for the Dallas Area Partnership. And the county will have their own. And so how many meetings of the CHC have there been so far? Okay, so 4. They are meeting. And so I just want to point out that this is the eyes and ears of the system. These are the people who are experiencing this every day in their community. This is folks who are experiencing homelessness themselves. Obviously, we have a forum in terms of public comment at these meetings and others, but this provides a standing forum for that input to occur. And I think that it's also a forum for the service providers who are not represented on this body to give feedback about what is happening in their world, about the viability of the ideas that are being tossed around here, and also I think emerging trends, things that they're seeing that are coming up in their worlds. So speaking to the direct service providers, when Mayor Rawlings kicked this off last month, one of the things he said was, you're at the table because you represent resources. I think he may have even called you the money people. But that's not the reason we're here.
That's a misnomer.
But I think that the distinction of not having a bunch of service providers on this body, it keeps us focused on the fact that they are, I hope you'll forgive my metaphors, I love them and I'm not always good at them, but they're the muscle of the system, right? This is where the rubber hits, where we hit the road and do the work, and that everything that we do here really needs to be oriented toward what are we doing so that the service providers have what they need to do their work effectively, that we are able to assess how well we're doing as service providers across the community, and that we understand what resources are necessary.
With the point being too, I think, of not to duplicate and not to respect all of the work that each of the entities does in their own right, but to augment.
That's right.
What is being done.
That's right. So Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance is an organization that has a variety of roles. Central to their roles are their designation as the continuum of care, and that's the way the primary way that HUD funds homelessness programs in communities. They are the continuum of care lead agency. And so as that lead agency, they coordinate this massive application to the feds for homeless funding. And even though HUD then contracts directly with the service providers, so they look at those, they review the applications. As a community, we have to prioritize those programs. It's a very difficult process. MDHA handles that. We already talked about the homeless management information system and the point in time count, but then there are other activities that they're expected to take on in terms of planning around homelessness. And as a coalition building organizations, they take on many other roles that have to do with advocacy, with filling gaps in the community, et cetera. And so to continue the metaphor, this is backbone support, right? They're communicating with the service providers and supporting them, and they are disseminating critical information both out to the service providers and to the various partners in the community. So this body came together initially as a local government corporation with the Dallas County and the City of Dallas. And this is certainly an oversimplification, but I think that there are three primary roles that are really important when we think about our local governments with elected officials and who are taxing jurisdictions, that clearly they're there to represent and respond to their constituents. And we talked about allocating resources. There are dollars that can be allocated and human resources, which are also clearly you're setting policy within your jurisdiction, right? And that policy can be formally in the form of ordinances, or it can be working with staff to really prioritize certain initiatives. And all of those roles are really critical when we think about collectively how we're going to impact this problem. As a few examples, I think on the policy side, one of the ways that cities and counties often support creating housing for the homeless is looking at the federal housing dollars that come through the city, right? And saying, how are we using these? Can we prioritize them or set aside some of those funds specifically for utilization for housing of people who have experienced homelessness? We talked just now about criminal justice policy, the way that both the police, courts, and the jail system interacts with individuals who experience homelessness. But there are other ways as well. You may know that for the primary source of subsidy for rental housing in Texas and nationwide, in fact, is the low-income housing tax credit. That's a very competitive process, and one of the key pieces of that is getting your local jurisdiction's support, right? So you have some leverage there, and then you have powers of appointment to a variety of different boards and commissions who have some role in homelessness.
Do other cities have, are they also receiving housing dollars or service dollars for homelessness
Yes.
in Dallas County?
Say again, so I don't know that you have any other.
The city of Garland.
Right. I am not sure whether any of the smaller cities are participating jurisdictions, which are the ones.
ESG, like Irving has ESG.
Irving has ESG.
So there are other
Right.
cities that are receiving funding.
So we can look into that. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Very few cities,
Right.
probably less than a handful.
Right.
Yeah, that's probably true.
But there are other cities in addition to the city of Dallas who do
But
receive.
we're talking probably less than 200,000.
Right.
Very good.
Right. So human capital, institutionalizing staff that really focuses on this issue. Obviously, there's general revenue. We pass through a fair amount of, and this is what we were just predominantly speaking to, of federal dollars, the Community Development Block Grant, our ESG funds, home dollars, all of which can be utilized in one way or another to subsidize housing, generally for affordable housing, but also specifically permanent supportive housing, in some cases rapid rehousing. And then, of course, you've just passed a general obligation bond, which provides some really critical capital for housing. These are just examples. There are a ton of other ways.
It did for housing. Did it do for homelessness?
What, the bond?
Yeah.
Yes.
It did for housing.
Yes.
Yeah, housing and homeless.
Right.
I
It's
think
in
it
the
was
same
20 million
20 million for the homelessness, yes.
homelessness.
I saw it.
Yeah.
So then we have our local government entity, which is the housing authorities. And I think it's important because sometimes there's some confusion for folks that housing authorities are not subsidiaries of a city or a county. They are their own entity, but they function under a regulatory environment which is established by HUD and the federal government. The commissioners are locally appointed, and I'm not sure whether, in some communities, the mayor appoints those commissioners. Not sure how it is here, done here, but they are locally appointed, And while housing authorities work in a very complex regulatory environment, there is some discretion about, and I think you spoke to it earlier, how might we prioritize vouchers? How do we look at screening criteria? And then some housing authorities actually do engage in direct development of housing. So all of those are things to think about, as well as the utilization of existing public housing units. So we've talked a little bit about all of these, and in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and roll through. I do want to speak to this because, Linda, I think you brought this up last time, that it'd be really important to have TDHCA, Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, here. The reality is that's perhaps the most important at the state level, but there are a lot of entities that impact this work, right? Where the locus of control is not here in Dallas and Dallas County. So there's an important role to coordinate with those folks, influence them, frankly, if you can, but they are not necessarily sort of within this circle of us trying to really address this issue in the community.
But are there ways that we would be kept apprised, for example, if there were funding opportunities coming through the Department of Veterans Affairs, through the state?
Absolutely.
Or something, or of those kinds of things that we ought to be aware of, so that we can reach out to those particular partners and say, okay, how do we put together that package?
Right, absolutely. And I would suggest that in most cases, you have organizations here on the ground that are watching for those kind of opportunities, right? And so that comes up in most cases from professionals that you have in the field, but certainly we can talk about.
I would like to have a much more systemic, a permanent type of, because I think those kinds of things are what we would be looking for in being able to better utilize and coordinate to put together a better package.
Right.
There's NOPAs issued all the time, but I don't think any one organization, city, county, or whatever, collects all of them in one place.
What did I see, Rick?
We can talk about that.
Does the county coordinate any kind of, do they collect that kind of information from the state or feds on where there are RFPs going out or new programming dollars coming out?
Not really, Commissioner.
So that's something that I think that we ought to focus on.
Right, and I suspect that MDHA is doing a lot of that as
And the
well.
city of Dallas has an environmental
John,
services department.
is that something that MDHA does?
Unaware, I don't know.
Okay, because I know the variety of people, the Bridge and Salvation Army are very much attuned to what's going on also. But I would like to see something where we really do figure out, have a point person or a point place to collect that so that everybody can be more attuned to it and
Right.
coordinate that better.
So obviously another type of stakeholder is the philanthropic community. And this happens at a number of levels. Certainly the foundation community is critical and perhaps the most engaged from a resource standpoint in the issue. But we have corporate donors. The faith-based community in Dallas particularly has been very supportive of projects, and individual donors as well. And I think every foundation has a different thought process about particularly how they would like to be involved. But I think it might be useful for us to think about the philanthropic sector as being very well positioned to advance new ideas, to accelerate change, or to come to scale, or fill very specific gaps in funding. We should not be depending on our philanthropic partners to fund ongoing services, frankly, right? That's not really a great use of the flexibility of their funds and their ability to really kind of take a longer view of systems change.
What do you think?
Oh, exactly.
Okay.
She's got it down, yes. Yes, philanthropy is really here to try out new things, filling gaps for programs that really need to keep going. We really aren't here to keep things ongoing.
No, and I see that the innovation are the things that I really see that Metals and Caruth and some of the other organizations are really excelling in.
That's right. And part of that is,
Cindy, who are you with?
I'm with the Meadows Foundation.
Thank you.
right, that I think there's some risk involved in innovation, right? You know, as governments, very often we want to implement proven strategies that we really know work because we're working with public dollars. Doesn't mean we don't innovate, but I think foundations often have a little more latitude to take that idea or the seed of a program and thoughtfully push it further and see what happens.
Well, let me revisit the foundation matter because I couldn't agree with Cindy more. But there is another foundation, and in Dallas it's privileged to have two, and it's Communities Foundation. It would be more sensitive to it, particularly because of the generous people and the abundance of generosity, I would say, that contribute to foundations with something in mind. And if we've done the teaching, the preaching, the coaching, the counseling necessary to sensitize the foundation, people at these communities foundation, about the circumstance of the homeless, those become, when you say, you could develop this to advise funds.
Well, I think we have a lot of opportunities here in this area because the philanthropic world, including Communities Foundation of Texas and Dallas Foundation, we've met numerous times trying to figure out a way to help the system improve. And so advise funds are when there's specific projects that want to occur, and yeah.
Just my experience is sometimes people sit and say, what should I do? You know, my grandson was going to come see me if I bought that Camaro. He's not coming. My son and daughter don't treat me like I think they should. They're not getting the money. What do you think I should do? And if we've got that primer, well then perhaps we can develop that sensitivity. And then what my experience is, several years at the Dallas Foundation, I served there, my experience is people come in and they have a heart for the city and they have a heart for homeless and they've contributed those funds. We have to make sure we ask for them.
That's right. And I think that one of the roles of the partnership is to define what some of those uses can be and also to lend confidence to the effort. That it's not just donors out there going it alone, but that as jurisdictions and other partners, we are there really to move this system forward and to improve what we're doing. So I'll go quickly these last couple of slides. But one of the things that I think is really important about the way you have formulated this body is that it does include private market partners. Because one of the most difficult things for a system as complex as the homeless service system to do is to engage the private market. And certainly organizations do it one-off here and there. They have a lot of success at the organizational level, also expend a lot of energy there. But it's so critical, particularly because we're talking about housing, and the vast majority of housing is in the private market. Right? So we have to figure out how to build bridges between property owners and property management companies. We got to figure out how to mitigate any risk that they have experienced or perceive to partner with us. And then on the housing development side, we have a lot of opportunities and a lot of need to figure out how do we create a pipeline of units, both for rapid rehousing and for permanent supportive housing. That's reliable, and that has traditionally really focused on affordable housing providers, but market rate providers can be drawn into that world, if you will. We make them drink the Kool-Aid and potentially get units set aside in market rate buildings as well. And so banks have always been a huge part of community development in general, and I think when we as a community are able to present really a viable, this is what we're going to do, here's our array of efforts, and we're actually going to achieve this. Often banks have been really taken a leadership role in stepping up and helping to catalyze that change. So again, we are seeking, because the thing about the private market is it has its own energy, right? It runs of its own accord because we're talking about businesses that grow or don't organically in terms of facing the market. So we really want to try to harness some of that energy in the market, and all of those folks who care about this issue but haven't really found a way to engage. We talked a little bit about community organizations earlier in terms of shelter, etc. There are a lot of purely civic or faith-based organizations that have an interest in this issue and can be engaged in effective ways. So finally, I want to just sort of end with what is it that we should be thinking about in terms of your role in the community. And I'm not going to go through all of this, but I would say first of all, focus. This is such a complex issue. There are so many programs. It's confusing, it's exciting, it's so challenging. It's going to be very tempted to be pulled down into the nitty-gritty detail of programs. And I would just encourage you as members of this body to back up and really think about the systems that need to be in place for us to not just manage homelessness, but to end it and prevent it, right? We have to manage it less if in fact we have effective ways of housing people. Think big, right? The other piece I would like for you to think of is that there is immense leadership at this table. And so you should be looking at problems that need high-level leadership to be solved. Because there are many, many very talented, sophisticated staff members of organizations across the community that are really good at figuring out how to make a program work and can tell you what is needed. You are there, should be here to really figure out how do we fill the big gaps in what hasn't been happening in the community. And then finally, I think, again, just really focus on those issues that are multi-sector, where you really need to figure out how to have the government sector interface effectively with philanthropy, or the service providers interface effectively with the apartment association and its members, for example. So those are initial thoughts for us, but I hope that we'll continue to be really engaged, and I think it's going to be important, and we'll probably take a lot of soul searching for you to figure out where you can be most effective so that we let the rest of the system do their job as well.
And to that end, because I have to leave to go to the 3:30 meeting, it would be good if Dallas Independent School District, because we did combine private, public sector to create After Aid to Educate, which is going to house 35 homeless youth. Because you know if they're homeless youth, they become homeless adults. So trying to get on the prevention side that you mentioned, that they present how we did that. And for, because I see you have on the agenda item national best practices, and we hope that can become Dallas best practice versus international.
I'm visiting there
With Hillary next week, but it would be good to see some good that is going on to address homelessness youth in the city of Dallas.
So I think at this point might be a really good point to say, because we have got, first of all, some incredible partners. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And the second piece is that through the Dallas City Commission and the Dallas County Commission, through the provider advisory group, through the citizen advisory group, we have got phenomenal resources. So I think between now and the next month, the next meeting would be to begin tapping some of those to answer some of these questions. Seems to be. Yes, sir.
I just have a question for you, Dan. With
one of the great examples of success is what Houston's done, with their coalition for the homeless, and they've essentially wiped out, the homeless veterans population there, and they've made great strides in other areas. As Albert pointed out, the intricacies of HUD they touch everybody here. And in Dallas is particularly handicapped a little bit because of the voluntary compliance agreement the city of Dallas is under right now too, as it relates to where some of this housing should be placed. So, but Houston's faced some of those same issues. And so they work directly with HUD, with their technical assistance program, to come up with solutions. And I think that they've established a nonprofit with the city, with philanthropic dollars, along with the city, that's going to help create that bridge from market rate, to whatever housing they can get, to help, bring the private sector in, along with, the whole screening process and everything else. So I just don't want to waste a lot of time reinventing the wheel.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
I think we can look at what has been done in Houston, and there are a variety of ways where they sort of said, here's our large problem, here are a few huge gaps, and those were places where they drew the private sector in, both in terms of referring to existing units and figuring out, particularly with the philanthropic community, how to fund gaps in development where they did want to create new units.
And they have some stronger nonprofits there that really focus only on homeless housing and that actually build housing, which is something we don't have an abundance of.
Right. We use those resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate that. So now you want to go the contract review?
Yeah, so let's just go into real quick, just into the contract briefing. I know we're running a little behind, and we want to make sure that we have time for the public speakers who signed up. So I think this is a quick agenda item, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Daniels.
Yeah, I look at the contract and recognizing that the city of Dallas had already set up the scope of work and those kinds of things. From the discussion that we're having here, I'd like to suggest that we send out an RFP to see what are the needs of the partnership, in a, as opposed to what the city of Dallas is doing with your internal commission. I mean, does that kind of make sense?
So for clarification, and I think, are you going to bring it up, Aaron? The contract briefing from the city? And so for clarification, the contract isn't specifically for the Citizen Homeless Commission. It was actually put in place to be able to support the Dallas Area Partnership. And there's been leadership changes since the initial conversations have happened. So I know that there were staff on the city side that was working with the county side, and we wanted to make sure that we were able to get a contract in place for a consultant to be able to support. I'm sorry, I turned the mic off. I need to do the cursor. And so here is just a little bit of background that shows that under a court order and a city council resolution, as a part of this group, both the city and the county agreed to provide up to $50,000 towards supporting the Dallas Area Partnership. And so the city's contribution, the up to $50,000, is being used to contract with the Corporation for Supportive Housing. That ended up being a recommendation that came from the Dallas Commission on Homelessness because of the relationship that CSH had and the special needs and the support that's needed for the Dallas Area Partnership. Of course, the Dallas Area Partnership can consider, other opportunities, issue what Commissioner Daniel mentioned, but this particular contract was put in place to be able to assist in providing and support.
Well, considering that the partnership did not exist when
Correct.
that was done,
Which is
there was no input from anyone else around the table, except probably yourself.
Yeah.
Exactly, and agree, and that's why either the city or the county, some entity would have had to put it in place so that when you come together, then you can discuss what additional decisions or scope of work that's needed. And so the current agreement that's in place that the city contracted with Corporation for Supportive Housing, it actually ends February 28th.
and so it began September 1. And so the role of the consultant is to be able to assist in education, talking about the frameworks, the systems that exist, as well as best practices. And I'm listing them here, also recommending strategies. The scope includes 4 monthly in-person partnership meetings, and so this is the second one they've attended. You all can be able to decide when those meetings are, because it is a part of the scope and it's available to you. And so a part of their role is also helping with developing the agenda, reference materials, coordinating calls, and there is a component that includes attending Citizen Homelessness Commission meetings, so at least 2 of those, and providing up to 8 hours of
That's
additional.
what the City of Dallas
Correct.
commission, right?
Correct. Yes,
And
ma'am.
that's why it just seems like to represent the partnership
Mhm.
that I would like to see, that we do put out an RFP
Mhm.
and list what would be, what do we see the needs of the partnership very
Yeah,
specifically.
and so I'm just here to kind of be able to give you a description of what exists with the city, and that this consultant is available to be able to support. And so right now, the city, again, that contract ends February 28th. We will extend the contract to cover the remaining of the fiscal year and be able to fund an additional 2 meetings in the event that's something you all want to take advantage of, just so that it's in place until, so that you have a resource that's available. And again, that's part of what the City of Dallas contribution is for that $50,000, up to $50,000 commitment.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, wonderful. We're running way late. Just to go over a couple quick things. I know everybody can read, so I'll make this very quickly. Coming up on future meetings, right now we're tentatively scheduled for February 16th and March 23rd. Any thoughts on that, Commissioner?
And we'll check on the timing. I did want to say a big thanks to DCCCD and very much to the guys in the back who are helping put this all together. It's very much appreciated that communities can work together. This is a good example of that. And we'll check to see about the availability on these dates. I don't see. That's what I was going to say.
Well, we had one at 9:30 and one in the afternoon, and I didn't know which the one preferred.
Is there a
I
preference?
prefer afternoon.
Do you?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, afternoon's fine.
Friday afternoon's fine? Well, then I think we may have a discussion offline about that.
I have suggestions of places we can do Friday afternoon meetings. This will be great, so.
No, I don't have any problem with it either. So that's makes sense to me if it fits the schedule of the DCCCCC.
If it comes from the Sen, I will tell them they can get it.
All right.
In the afternoon?
Yes, ma'am.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Well, just a couple quick things coming up. Obviously, the point in time homeless count is coming up next week. And then also both the assembly meeting for the continuum of care and also the MDHA planning retreat. We're going to need to have representatives there. I know I'll be there, and I'm sure Commissioner Daniels will be there, but you'll get more information on that online. So with that being said, politician trying to be quick on time, is we have our public speakers, Mr. Ciccarelli. I know we have 3 speakers, Mr. Ciccarelli, Ms. Cheryl Park, Mr. Christopher Getty. You guys have 3 minutes. Mr. Ciccarelli, it's good seeing you this week. Thank you for taking the time to come into my office, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Robert Ciccarelli. Before I say anything, I really do believe the mayor is not on the same page as anybody, because I haven't heard anything about homelessness. And last article wrote about like 2 weeks ago. He never brought up homelessness, about his transition from him being the mayor to the new mayor. Nothing about homelessness, about when he first got to be as mayor, to be #1 object. So if he's not on the same page as you, you're just spinning your wheels. Can I just be honest with you? Next part, MHMR providers. Salvation Army, MDHA, Bridge, MetroCare, and the city. All these people were here today. I've asked them all to speak. They all refused. What blows me away is all this information that can be used for these people have refused to talk. 100% of the people. You're not getting any of the information that these people out here can use for your purpose to report to the mayor. I am asking you to, again, to invite these people, If they don't, and while they're here, if they say no, you'll see how much they really care. In other words, put them on the spot. I'm just saying, right here, no, there's 3 minutes right here. That's what I'm saying, okay? Let me get my 3 minutes, please. I mean, MDHA, last week I asked them to speak, they refused. Castellano and Cindy Crane, Mogo, Blake Fetterman, Shaletra, who else? Mr. Woody and Mr. Mertel. All of them refused to talk at all. Whatever it is, they're scared for the homeless to shatter their program. Whatever it is, it's like a collusion like Colin Kaepernick. You're not getting any information. Okay, again, today, same thing as before. Dallas-born News gave you a D-. Hey, they'll probably give it to you again. But it's just a waste of time. Homeless forum, Nadia. I'm trying to get a homeless forum, and we see 2 people here sound asleep, homeless people, okay? You don't see it. You avoid it. You avoid everything that's going on with the homeless, and right here you have to see what's going on. You avoided the whole 3 hours about these 2 people, okay? That's a crying shame, really, man, you know? I mean, how many times I have to say it? How many times, you know? It's really a shame what's going on around here. I'm just really mad at the providers, again, that you're shutting up. 100% of you are shutting up about what needs to be done. Shaletra, I'm disappointed in you big time, man. You have a lot to share. You're running for another position. I want to hear what you have to say, but you haven't said one word.
Thank you, Mr. Chigarelli.
Okay, huh? Okay, one more thing. The bond, about the bond election, the $20 million with rapid rehousing, that wasn't been brought up at all today. We talked about it, and if you don't say nothing, these people are stay on the streets until permanent supportive housing, and you see what's happening.
Thank you, Mr.
very much.
Thank you. Cheryl Park?
Is Cheryl here?
Cheryl Park?
Okay, going.
Christopher Getty?
Yes.
You have anything to say?
Yes.
Can you come up here? Tell me what you told me, all right? Make it a wake up.
Where?
Here you go, sir.
About your problems.
Well, where?
Right here.
Right here.
About your problems.
I'm sorry, I have a horrible time sleeping. I'm staying at the Salvation Army, and I went to sleep accidentally, so I missed a lot of it. Mainly because they get you up at 4 in the morning at the Salvation Army, and I have insomnia, and I don't get to sleep till around 2 in the morning, so I get like 2 hours of sleep at night. So I'm sorry that I went to sleep. I've been struggling with homelessness for the last 3 years. I'm being autistic, I have a hard time interacting with society, interacting with other people, and that's been a big part of the problem. I'm desperate to get off the street. I do get a disability check. Basically, I have a lot of medical problems. The reason I came to Dallas was to get neurosurgery done for a terminal condition I have in my cervical spine. That didn't work out because it's inoperable. I'm having trouble getting the medical care I need in this city, namely because I'm autistic and I have this horrible problem interacting with people, which is the definition for autism, is inability to interact. So I desperately need help in that area. I just don't know where to go. I was in the medical field most of my life, and my dad was a doctor, and everything was always cut out for me as far as getting the best doctors until I came to Dallas to get neurosurgery. And I've just been lost since then as to how to interact with the medical community to get the medical care I need, both psychiatric and even worse, the medical care for this spinal condition I've got, which is eventually going to kill me. And so I'm lost, and I don't know where to go. I don't know how to interact and correctly with people to make things happen. And this has been going on for a while.
Mr. Getty, if you don't mind. Thank you so much. I know you say you have a hard time communicating. I think you did a wonderful job. If you don't mind, would you mind staying here and let us get your information? We have folks here who can help you get access to that.
Please,
and
please.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And we'll promise we'll help.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Goody.
All right. Well, with that being said, it's 3:48 and meeting is adjourned.
Thank you very, very much, everybody, for coming.
Pardon?
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you Miss Park? I'm sorry, Miss Park. I called you and I didn't hear from you. Come on up. I just didn't hear. Sorry, we called your name and I'm sorry. And I met you earlier. It was nice to meet you earlier, Miss Park. You have 3 minutes. Go ahead. Sorry about that.
On July 14th, I was baseball bat to the brain by a military post-traumatic stress syndrome person. Just was thrown out. And both of his wife and daughter worked for DART. And DART police knew it, and they didn't even bother telling me. And as far as his autism, he's doing very well. He's dealing with the people in the streets, and he's also dealing with the police that don't really care anymore because they care more about their paycheck than caring about the public. New Year's Eve, they threw us all off the train at midnight, didn't even honor the last train in to Botman Lake, and I spent New Year's Day in the hospital because of it, and that's ridiculous. It advertised that New Year's Eve was free. 15 people come off that train, don't eat that ticket. DART police told that train to go on instead of letting us get back on that train. I had to walk from State Fair to Baylor. I went from 307 to 132 in less than a year because people wanted to rob people and kill people over just staying out of the code. Yesterday morning, the hazmat team showed up and threw everybody's Christmas, everything the churches gave us away, brand new sleeping bags and everything, right there at Botman Lake, the entire area. And all DVD would just laugh about it. And that's ridiculous. The police can't deal with the homeless. How can the homeless get off the streets if they're constantly threatening them with the jail and everything else instead of listening to both sides? They don't do that. And that is ridiculous too.
Thank you, Ms. Park. Thank you for the time. All right. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.